So, with the recent Robert Pattinson news, I just wanted to give my thoughts on the Batman Part 2 situation going forward. And this ultimately comes after the recent news of Robert Pattinson signing on for Dune Part 3 for a supplemental role, which could really conflict the filming for the Batman Part 2 and even possibly leading to another delay for the long-awaited movie. And this really comes to shooting conflicts. There is still a chance that they would be able to fit both Robert Pattinson and the overall production of the Batman Part 2 into 2026 before the now 2027 release in October. But I really wouldn't be surprised if this gets pushed even a few months further into early 2028, which would be pretty drastic given this movie was supposed to come out this year. And I also think this is ultimately heading down into the possibility that this movie gets canceled altogether. I think that's still unlikely, just given the success of the first movie. It's not like it hit $1 billion, but I would say the high 800s in terms of 800 million still was pretty good for a pilot project. And I think if we're looking at the Christian Bale Batman trilogy, seeing that the Dark Knight really nearly doubled in terms of its box office profit, I could easily see a world where the Batman Part 2 surpasses $1 billion. And I think another thing that really has to be mentioned is the ultimate cultural relevance that the Batman really drove. And I think this showed a true hunger for a continued development in this universe. And I think we saw that the Reeves universe and this specific dark noir aesthetic really could carry over to something as niche as a Penguin spinoff. And I think really with the success of the Penguin show, that there is still a high demand for this movie and for this universe. And even though I think certain delays can really add to the anticipation of this film, I think it's definitely possible that's still the case. But my personal opinion on this would be, I think there does have to be a clear path forward, and I really think you have to make progress one way or another. If on one hand, if we're looking at some of the other delays, if you're potentially having a timing issue or it just not being the right environment for Matt Reeves to really continue this or to really give it his full attention, I think a proper alternative to that could really be just handing the ropes over to Lauren LaFranc, who led the Penguin show, and I really think she did an excellent job with that. You still had Matt Reeves contributing a lot to that show and working along her, but I think not only could their collaboration really help him pass the torch to potentially her, but I think she would ultimately be in a good position for someone to take over the direction of this universe, even if that was just a temporary thing. And I don't think she would be someone coming from right field when you're looking at something like the sequel trilogy, when you're going from J.J. Abrams to Rian Johnson. I would say also for that, thinking to the positive of what that did ultimately allow all of those movies to be made in a short time frame, even though some of the overall tone of the stories felt a little bit juggled there. But I think in this instance, if you have someone like Lauren LaFranc, that could ultimately be a possibility in terms of getting the script direction done for this or the overall directing for this movie. But now it's looking like this is also a Robert Pattinson scheduling issue too, since he's done not only Mickey 17, but now the Dune Part 3 filming, and both of these are also within Warner Brothers, which I think is a little bit interesting. And I think if that's the case, you still have an opportunity for more spin-off projects just to keep this universe relevant. And I think obviously the clear answer would be a second season of The Penguin, but I think the way it ended, maybe it's not too clear if it was meant for a second season. It could have just been a one-off, and you pretty much expected that to lead directly into the second Batman movie. If that's the case, I think another spin-off project would be a good avenue, and I think Lauren LaFranc in control of that would be a good move. And it could still feature some of the same characters from The Penguin. I really think Kristen Miliotti's Sophia was a really great part of this. So if you did something like a Catwoman spinoff, and I think you obviously have the setup for that, for how the Penguin finale ended, I really think that could be a perfect way to continue this on top of the recent delays and maybe even another potential delay. It may be hard to really get this into production fast enough when you're probably going to lead into the Batman Part 2's pre-production soon, but I think if all else fails, this wouldn't be a bad option. And I think on top of this, for the Batman Part 2, if you're still having some holdup in terms of the directing, again, Lauren LaFranc I think could be a great alternative. And you could also easily hand it over to Matt Reeves for the Batman Part 3. The other elephant in the room here I think that needs to be addressed is obviously the new direction of the DCU with potentially their own Batman in contrast with the Robert Pattinson Batman. So it's very likely that this was all just a placeholder for that. But I do think there is still a world where both of these versions of Batman could almost exist simultaneously, or you could even do something similar to Marvel in terms of developing a multiverse. You wouldn't necessarily have to do a No Way Home version of Batman, but I think just to explain the different variants. But I think these are, of course, all just some ideas on what you could do to really continue this universe. And I think even in comparison to something like Daredevil, which I think is a really great developed universe as well, but I would say the new recent series in Daredevil Born Again isn't nearly as interesting as the Penguin. Even though they have their differences, I would say they're pretty much in the same style. So I think that's really why you have to keep this universe going one way or another. But I think there is also just an overall demand for more Batman and for this overall universe. But feel free to let me know your thoughts on this, and I'll see you later.